Here we go. All right, so for those of you watching the recording, I messed up, but we're starting talking with the treatise on the power and primacy of the Pope, which is right after the Small-Called Articles, talking about how basically we do not have to follow the apostolic succession and divine right that the Pope claims. And section 38, which I just read, is about how even in scriptures with Jeremiah and the apostles and Caiaphas, ungodly priests were not to be obeyed.
At what point was the term the Pope used or established?
So it was, I think 1082 is when this great schism happens between the East and the West. And it was at that point when the Pope claimed authority exclusively, and the East said, you know, that's a step too far. So I think it was 1082. In terms of the term Pope, I do not know how far back linguistically that goes. But we made it a good 1,000 years before the split happened. Something else that people don't realize is there's a lot of different rites within the Catholic Church. So the Romans are just one of them, but there's certainly others, and a lot of them do not forbid marriage of priests, as one example. So even we think of Roman Catholicism as being it, but there's actually quite a bit of difference even within it. And then Eastern Orthodox, they have their own setup over, well, east, right? Once you get east of Rome and all that, lots of other rites and things. It gets confusing quickly. All right, so continuing on with why it is that even if the Pope was installed correctly, they would not have to obey him. This will be section, I think we're still in section 3, but it's paragraph 51. Thus, the Pope exercises a double tyranny. He defends his errors with violence and murder, and he forbids judicial inquiry. The latter does more harm than any cruel act. For when the Church has been deprived of valid judicial process, it is not possible to remove ungodly teachings and impious forms of worship, and they destroy countless souls generation upon generation. So what is this judicial process that they're talking about? What do you think? So basically, when Martin Luther has his 95 Theses, right? Hammers it on the door of the church. Probably less dramatic than we like to reenact it, but he wanted to talk about things. If you've never read the 95 Theses, we do not hold to them. You are still Roman Catholic if you agree with the 95 Theses. That was far from the birth of the Lutheran Church. But what we had was basically the Pope saying, well, it's nice that you disagree, lest you forget I'm the Pope. Therefore, whatever I say goes, because God says that whatever I say goes. So there is no room for disagreement, right? It's sort of the because I'm your father and I said so argument, except for with adults, right? And what is it that Paul says? Search the scriptures and see if what I say is true, right? There should never be anyone who is above scrutiny, especially in the church, because we have an objective authority and you have a fallible, infallible, fallible, right? So it's good to hold each other to this standard to make sure that we don't go astray. In the same way that I would try to shepherd you all well, you should try to make sure that I shepherd you well, right? We work together on this.
When he says search the scriptures, at that point in time, what scriptures was it?
So it's amazing how much of the Old Testament points to Jesus. And so first of all, we have, yes, absolutely, he's referring back. And then at the time of Paul, so you would have about half of the New Testament in circulation. And then the churches would have usually one book at a time that then they would circle among them. So the apostolic writings, but mostly the Old Testament.
Their first pope was Sirius in 398, referred to as a pope.
Thank you. So
officially.
Sirius was referred to as the Pope in 398. So that's helpful. Did it say anything about why that or what that term means or?
No, the rest are all the bishops of Rome. He's prior to that, and sometimes called different things. But he was the first person that officially called himself the Pope.
Interesting.
And so they recognize that and they have to.
Thank you for adding that. I appreciate that. Lest you all think that I know or I don't learn every day. I learn every day. We were talking about that in class, how another guy said he feels like he's a toddler trying to learn calculus. And I was like, hey, if Luther doesn't move past the small catechism, we are all learning as we go. All right, so we don't have to follow the Pope. And we've established that the central authority that the Church of Rome claimed is not scriptural. So moving on.
At one point, there were 22 bishops.
22?
Prior to 398.
Well,
had 22 different bishops.
And in the early medieval times, they had 3 simultaneous popes. So go try and figure that one out, right? Apostolic succession, which one of the 3, right?
Right, that is correct.
So it's a mess.
304.
All right, so we're moving now to the power and jurisdiction of bishops, which is still in the treatise. And I'm going to go about halfway through paragraph 67. Therefore, where the true church is, there must also be the right of choosing and ordaining ministers. Just as in an emergency, even a lay person grants absolution and becomes the minister or pastor of another. All right, so rubber is hitting the road now. We're finally getting to where we are collectively, right? So first of all, if you're not aware, both in our hymnal and in the small catechism, there is an emergency rite of baptism. Okay? So if there's a car accident, if there's something tragic, you all are, I guess, authorized by the church to perform a baptism, right? Because it's God's work and not ours. It's not ideal, certainly, but it is absolutely acceptable. Kind of putting yourself in that position, isn't it? A little bit. Gotta get my right paper set out here. Wine, that one's on wine. Okay, so we had actually a discussion question. I'm very thankful. My professor this semester, Dr. Brust, typed this up and this morning, unrelated to our discussion tonight. And I was like, I'm stealing that and reading it word for word. So if it sounds good, John Brust is his name. He's an excellent instructor. I'm gonna read here a little bit. The church, perhaps we must think here of a specific congregation, has a right as an instantiation of the priesthood of all believers and as the people of God for whom the gifts are, to elect or choose, call, and ordain a pastor. I don't know if instantiation is actually a word, but he speaks like 7 languages, and sometimes he was flipping back and forth last week between all of them as an occurrence, right? So our specific congregation as the church has the right from God to call, elect, choose, and ordain a pastor. All right. The fundamental issue underlying this assertion is God's people's claim on the means of grace, which are given them by divine right to be received. When that divine right is interdicted by the intervention of wicked bishops or the Pope, that doesn't make the right go away, because the right is given by God, and the wrongdoing is purely done by human right, which is always subordinate to divine right. That means that in the preservation of the divine right, a different human right may be ascertained and exercised, namely in the failure of the authorities by human right, and another authority by human right may be established. Okay, that was a little bit wordy. That's just how this guy talks. He's genius. What's the difference in human right and divine right? And we are using R-I-T-E, not right as in right or left or right as in correct, but R-I-T-E as in like ritual. So what's the difference in the two? Somebody give me an example of a divine right. Baptism, right? So baptism is something that God has, sorry, Webster's dictionary me, instantiation is a word and it was used correctly. I knew that. I knew that. So baptism is a divine rite. It is something that is instituted by God, right? Now, our practice surrounding ordination. Okay, now I'm not talking the concept. Our practice surrounding ordination, is that a divine rite or a human rite?
You have the right baptism, but if you're doing it how you're doing baptism, it can vary dramatically, and it doesn't really matter. It's a human, right? It's not how you want to do it. You can change it. So I mean, whether you dunk them in the water, drown them in the river, put it on their forehead, make it X, I don't think it matters, to be honest.
Sure. So with baptism, it's a divine rite, and the amount of water is not significant, correct? With ordination, the concept of ordination is a divine rite. The way that we institute it, what I mean by that is having different people come and then the election thereof, a call process, all of the gobbledygook that you guys are joyously getting to go through. That part is the human rite. So that part we can change. But what we cannot change is the divine rite, right? The fact that you, as the church, St. Paul, just like us as the church, St. James, has the right to have a pastor because we have a right to receive God's gifts. He has promised to deliver himself through the word, the preaching of the word. He has promised to deliver himself through the Eucharist. He has promised to deliver himself in baptism. So we have a right to receive those things. And it's kind of a backwards institution, right, for the pastor? We have the right to call a pastor because somebody's got to give us these things that God has promised. All right, so there's some stuff about Latin I will probably skip over. Okay, as a matter of fact, the Evangelical Lutheran Church, and what he means by that is not the ELCA, but the Confessional Lutheran Church throughout the ages, has had a broad variety of church government. Bishops, presidents, consistories, congregationalism, etc. None of them are decreed by the scriptures, i.e., no church structure is by divine right, just by human right. The divine right, however, must stand. Nothing can interdict the divine right of God's people to receive the public ministry of word and sacrament, to have doctrine judged, to have the binding and loosing keys exercised in their midst. So whether this is carried out in a diocesan manner with the uses of consistories, presidents, or on a, he uses quotes here, loose congregationalist basis, is of little concern to Lutherans, so long as a rightly constituted ministerium, i.e. a called and ordained, again in quotes, ministerium, publicly exercises the ministry of word and sacrament. With all that said, the fact remains that a congregation is not obligated to abide a priest it did not elect. This election can be exercised in various ways under various systems. Here in America, in the LCMS, it is exercised by the Voters' Assembly. But it should be borne in mind that a, quote, pre-selection, end quote, has already taken place. The district president, by human right, has the power to veto nominations from the congregation that for whatever reason are unsuitable, as well as the right, the human right, to nominate candidates for the congregation's consideration. In an episcopal or consistorial system in which the bishop or consistory places a pastor in a congregation, a Lutheran congregation has, or at least should have, the veto over any candidate. All right. Like I said, smart guy. That was his response in a chat. We have a forum that we have to participate in, just conversationally. That was just something he typed up. So smart guy.
Off the top of his head.
Yeah, off the top of his head. So yeah, I'm in a good place. I'm very thankful to be learning that.
I imagine what
So-
sermons like.
Yeah, sermons must be fantastic, huh? Okay, so
If you understand the rule.
so the question from online, did you say ordination itself is divine? Okay, So here is where we are getting into a little bit of a sticky wicket, but I think if we take it on the whole, it's going to make sense. All right. So you congregationally have the right to call a pastor, right? Did you all vote for me? Yeah, right? Right? Voted, I'm here, I'm thankful, that happened. The district decided that I was okay, right? As we work through all of the challenges that we find ourselves in, the district said, this guy is sound enough that we can work with him. We are okay with him being installed here in this capacity, right? So when we get into ordination versus licensure, is this a divine right or is this a human right? Is the word license in scripture?
Is human.
The licensure is human, right? So it is a human right. Now, we have this in place for good order. Does that make sense? We do it because we recognize that it is for our benefit to have checks and balances in place. Right? So what is happening is the congregation says, we want this guy. We have examined him. We want him to be our vicar, our pastor. I'm not going to draw that distinction. We want him to hold the office, right? The district president, by human right, because we are willfully submitting to him as being in the synod, we willfully submit. By human right, he says, well, I've gone over this guy as well. And I agree with you that he is a good fit for your congregation and that he will be, hopefully confessional and faithful. And I recognize his ability to perform this sacrament ministry. Right? This is where it gets tricky with the human right versus the divine right, because we are well within our divine right. We can operate within the divine right, thumb our nose at the LCMS and say, well, he's our new pastor, and we're now an independent Lutheran church. By scriptures, 100% fine, no problem whatsoever. It is because of respect for the human right of submitting ourselves to this organization that we willfully let the district president make these decisions. But as the representative of the church, as our bishop, if you will, he thinks it's fine as well. So while the synod is not ordaining me yet, okay, if you think of ordination as able to practice anytime, in any place, anywhere, you're on your own, right? By licensure, they are saying, well, you have this commitment with your people. You are operating within the divine right. We recognize that and we approve of that. Is that making sense?
But that can be modified at any time by them.
Oh, sure.
Or they can withdraw it at any point in time if they feel
Okay, so pretty much the only person who has little say in this matter is me. Okay,
right.
because if the district says, for whatever reason, this guy's no longer a fit, right? I'm done. Or alternatively, if you guys say this guy's no longer a fit, I'm done. Right? Yes.
And there's no written yardstick that gauges that on either side, either through the congregation or through the seminary.
Whether or not I'm a good fit?
Yeah.
You mean like how I could get kicked out?
Yeah. Isn't there rules or isn't there a graduation? Isn't there some steps to it?
So there are 5 reasons why you can kick a pastor out. I do not have the list in front of me because we are not to the 5 yet. And the reason for that is good, because the situation we find ourselves in is kind of the Wild West, right? And I'm the sheriff, right? Because
And he's got a gun, too.
I do.
Imagine dealing with Wyatt.
Oh, Wyatt Earp, absolutely. But this is I'll say dangerous territory, right? Because I haven't done 4 years of seminary like Pastor Malms did. because you guys deserve a 4-year seminary guy. Okay, I'm the first one to say, send somebody.
Is
Right.
that the first step? I mean, or you have to complete the full 4-year seminary
For ordination,
for ordination?
ordination is going to take me an additional 2 years. And then I have 2 more years of study after that. So it'll be 3 years of pulpit stuff before I get ordained at the earliest, and then 2 more years of school yet. With ordination comes a little bit more of that surety, to where the synod and the seminary say, we've given this guy years of instruction, we're going to vouch for him. And then the congregation says, we recognize your vouching, and we're gonna work with him. Since I'm not there yet, and since we are doing the best we can in the circumstances that we find ourselves in, right? I'm not really entitled to those protections yet. And the seminary doesn't want to vouch for me yet, because they haven't taught me the way that they want to teach me. And that's all okay. That is 100% fine by me. And I think it's good that we are all together proceeding with caution, taking our time in this.
But our congregation's constitution does have some statements in it as to why they can have a pastor leave or ask the pastor. I don't know, ask, or they can actually
Probably both.
tell them.
Yeah, probably both.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of provisions that you can add. I think if I'm, and you know what, I'm not going to say. I was told that there's 5 reasons that they discussed in the class above me at the seminary last week. I wasn't in that class, so I'm just gonna keep my mouth shut rather than say something stupid. But because of how we are a constitutionally led, congregationally led synod, if you had reasons 6, 7, 8, and 9 in your constitution that you could fire a pastor, then that's between you and that pastor. So certainly you could add on additional reasons there.
I would think every congregation within the LCMS must have a constitution.
Yeah, some of them are good, some of them are not.
Yeah, they don't have to
Sure.
be exactly the same,
Mhm.
No,
right?
There
But
are,
in our case, I know we do have some items in there that specifically say why we can, or how we can do this.
absolutely. And I know Eric's working on the revision committee, and
Yeah.
I'm so thankful that in the position I'm in, I'm not allowed to mess with the Constitution, because that will, all that business stuff, that's not me. I'm glad that some of y'all can do it, but that is not me. So I do not have those protections, but that's fine. That is good, because this is not an ideal situation. This is a doing the best we can situation. And that's something too, that the seminary doesn't make a big deal about this. All right. And we don't talk about it a lot, because it would be great if everybody could go to a 4-year thing. We have 5 vacancies in a 9-church circuit, right? So what are our choices, right? We close, or we raise up someone in place who is willing and deemed able by the congregation, right? We don't want to close all these churches, right? That's terrible. So we do the best we can in a less than ideal situation. And the reason I bring all of this up with this licensing and things is because you all deserve to have the confidence that we are not messing with something that should not be messed with. I tell you all the time how big of a deal the Book of Concord is to me and to these churches, that we never want to do something that is contrary to our confessions, or something that is contrary to Scripture, right? So power and primacy lays the foundation for all of this. And then we just continue on with this distinction between human rights and divine rights. And that's how we get to sort of licensing being okay. So does anyone have any more questions? Anything you want to discuss or try and pick apart a little bit?
Hasn't the Pope decided that he's the ruler, he is the king of everything? Hasn't, that's already written in his contract, so to speak?
Oh yeah, the Pope is all there is to the Pope. He has no need to submit himself to anyone in his view.
Right,
So
which
yes,
is wrong.
correct. That is not correct. It is correct to say the Pope is wrong. Yes.
Correct to say it's not.
Um,
Because he's still just a human being,
absolutely.
just like us.
Absolutely. And the reason why we went to the power and primacy of the Pope is because basically what they say is the reason why we don't recognize the Pope as the super pastor is because of these other things, because of the divine rights that the church has. And it's kind of a neat thing that the church, well, who's the church? It's the sick and the elderly and the lame and the people who need Jesus, right? And we're the ones who have, you know, the ability to make all these decisions and do these things. We don't submit ourselves to some guy in a fancy hat. All right. Well, hopefully that settles consciences and gives a good understanding. And if that is not, and I'm saying this as much for the people on video watching it later, email me or call me and we'll talk about it. We've still got 2.5, 3 weeks, something like that, until I do communion anywhere. So there's still time and there's still discussion to be had. But I will save that for questions and we will press on. So we're going to talk about communion practice. And for that, we go to the Augsburg Confession, Article 22. All right.
Now, is any of that in the booklet that we have?
So and I apologize, I forgot you weren't here a couple weeks ago. We're putting this one aside to have the communion talks.
Oh, okay.
So we'll pick this back up once we get the communion stuff laid to rest. But it's important to me that there's plenty of time for discussion so that nobody feels like, well, like I'm Wild Bill Hickok, which I think I said I am, but you know what I mean.
What are we looking at in the Augsburg?
So this is Article 22 concerning both kinds. And I know this is a weird place to go, but it will make sense in a moment. Article 22. I'm going to read from the authoritative German here. Among us, both kinds of the sacrament are given to the laity for the following reason. There is a clear order and command of Christ in Matthew 26. Drink from it, all of you. Concerning the cup, Christ here commands with clear words that they all should drink from it, so that no one can contest and interpret these words as if they only applied to priests. Paul indicates in 1 Corinthians 11 that the whole assembly of the Corinthian church used both kinds. Moreover, this usage remained in the church for a long time, as can be demonstrated from the historical accounts and from the writings of the fathers. Cyprian mentions in many places that the cup was given to the laity in his time. St. Jerome says that the priest who administered the sacrament distributed the blood of Christ to the people. And Pope Gelasius himself ordered that the sacrament should not be divided. Not a single canon with the order to receive only one kind can be found. Nobody knows when or through whom this custom of receiving only one kind was introduced. Now, if it is obvious that this custom, introduced contrary to God's command and to the ancient canons, is not right, accordingly, it was not proper to burden the consciences of those who desired to use the sacrament according to Christ's institution, and to compel them to act contrary to the order of our Lord Christ. Furthermore, because dividing the sacrament contradicts Christ's institution, the customary procession with the sacrament, has also been discontinued. It's a weird starting place, isn't it? Both kinds. What does both kinds mean? Bread and wine. Bread and wine. So still today, sometimes you will go places where you get one or the other, right? And generally, what do you get?
Right.
The bread, right? Priest is going to hold on to the wine. Generally speaking, right? Why is this bad?
Because
It's not scripture.
it's never been separated in scripture.
It's never been. So what is it that we talk about in the small catechism of being worthy to come to the Lord's Supper? You believe what? You believe the words that this is for you. All right.
That it is the true body and blood of our Lord.
But and specifically for you. Luther makes the point that it's for you. But what if you don't get it? Is it still for you?
Mm.
Right? This is his blood poured out for you, but watch me drink it. That was for you. Was it? Right? Was it? Something that I say all the time is that anything in our tradition, anything that brings in doubt should be eschewed, right? Because we have confidence in Scripture. We have confidence in God's words. And if something is going to bring it into confuses us or makes us doubt what we know to be true, then that new practice is wrong, right? And so if I say, Noah, this cup of tea is for you, right? Do you believe it's for you? Do you believe it's for you?
It's your tea.
I'm telling you it's for you.
It's your tea.
No, come on. I'm telling you this is for you.
It's your tea.
He's having a hard time with this. Pat, this tea is for you. Do you believe it's for you?
No.
Okay, you're supposed to say yes. Somebody say yes.
Yes.
Okay, so if you believe this is your tea, right? And then I say it was good tea. It's your tea, but it was good. I drank it. Now, how do you feel? Confused?
Yeah.
Left out.
Left out? Yeah, left out is exactly right. Okay, so you're saying this is for you. I'm supposed to believe this is for me, but then you won't give it to me. Well, what does that do? Nothing good, right? Where we are supposed to come to the altar and know beyond a shadow of a doubt that our sins are well and truly forgiven, that we sinners are truly forgiven. Well, now I don't know. So they're messing with it, right? And then how am I supposed to feel about everything else? All right, why is this guy doing what Jesus did not do? And what else is going on here? And it brings in doubt in all the wrong spots, right? So let's press on that a little farther. What did Jesus have? Very simple, bread and wine, right? Now then, we are going to keep this conversation in the abstract. And at some point, I will figure out who are the juice drinkers among us, and then we will have private conversations with them. So what I don't want to have happen, I honestly don't know who takes juice. I know somebody does at both churches. I don't know who it is. But that's not the point. I don't want you to tell me who it is, because I'll talk to them separate. But we're going to talk about just in the abstract, this idea of bread and wine, okay? Why wine?
It was the most common drink at that time.
Well, it's the most common drink for sure, yeah.
Safest.
Safest?
Water was
Yeah, because the water was bad. So these things are all true. I'm going to say to the answer of why wine is because, well, Jesus gave it to us. Jesus instituted his command with wine. And what was Jesus's first miracle?
Changing water.
Turning water into wine, right? Right. So we know Jesus isn't against wine. Not only was it wine, but it was good wine, right? The master of the feast comes to him and he says, hey, normally, you bring the good stuff out first and let everybody get toasted, and then you bring out the crummy stuff. But you've held back the good stuff. What is it they say about the Son of Man? He comes eating and drinking, and they say that he is a glutton and a drunkard, right? He was not a glutton and a drunkard. He was eating and drinking, right? And furthermore, well, grape juice just didn't exist, right? Before Louis Pasteur in the 1850s. Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, grapes, once they sat out for any length of time at all, they started fermenting.
Mhm.
So it was going to be wine of one sort or another.
Yes, absolutely. And has anyone here not had apple juice? You pull out of the back of the fridge and you pop it, and it goes, psst, and you're like, oh, it's now apple cider, right? Doesn't always taste the best, but it's apple cider. So we know that they used wine. Now here's an interesting little tidbit. Does anybody know who Pliny the Elder is? Does that name ring a bell? Pliny the Elder? Okay, he's basically a wine historian. He's a Roman royalty. He did a little bit of military service, but the rest of the time he'd have people carry him around the Roman Empire, and he would document stuff. So he wrote 37 volumes on natural history, but his favorite stuff was wine. And Flanerian, I think I'm saying that right? Flanerian wine. It was said that if you knocked it over and a candle touched it, it would ignite. Now, that's not really wine, that's port or fortified wine, right? So an interesting side note there is that if anything, the wine back then was stronger. But let's give a little more historical context as well. Did they drink straight wine? Generally, no.
Rather than watered down?
Absolutely, yes. Usually it would be watered down. So in Rome, it would be watered down, usually 1-to-1. And it was barbarians who would drink their wine straight, right? Because it's kind of wasteful and I don't know what the right word is there, non-civilized to drink wine straight. So generally, they would mix it with water. Now, if you all don't know, I don't drink much beer. I generally drink whiskey. I have no problem with alcohol. But alcohol is not really my concern, right? We are not getting drunk at church regardless, right? So why are we talking about this? Here's why I bring it up, okay? We start with communion in one kind, to where you only get half of it, okay, but you're supposed to get all of it. Okay? Now, if doctrine is supposed to drive our practice, right? First doctrine and then practice, why are we adding in distinct and separate drinks, breads, anything different to Christ's command? Okay? So if we are all to come together and drink of the same cup, but then we have subsets of the cup, right? What's Brown versus Board of Education, separate but equal is not actually equal or constitutional, right? Not that we care what the Supreme Court thinks in church, but they bring up a fair point, right? It's different. And why do we have it different? Well, Welch's said in 1898 that their grape juice was a more Christian alternative to communion wine. Isn't that interesting? That was how they originally marketed their grape juice, was as a more Christian alternative to wine.
Based on what?
Based on them being prohibitionists. This is 22 years before prohibition takes place in the United States. So they are on the cutting edge of that societal movement, right? You guys have to head out. Thank you for coming anyway. It's okay, even though you have to leave early, I appreciate you coming. Oh, nice to be seen. All right, Lord willing, we'll see y'all Sunday. So we have this notion of piety, and pietism really is what's nudging grape juice in to communion, right? We didn't have the option for 1900 years, but all of a sudden we have the option, and it's marketed as being more Christian than alcohol. Now, it's something that a lot of people struggle with, and I fully recognize there are people who have an alcohol problem. Just like there's people like me that have a cheeseburger problem, right? There's real problems that come from alcohol. But at the point that we say, okay, what Jesus did and what Jesus instituted is harmful, and so I'm going to modify that to make it better for me, right? Well, that's where the red flags are starting to go off, right? So communion in both kinds becomes communion in three kinds. And the issue becomes, how much are we willing to mess with Christ's institution? Do you remember 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when gluten-free was all the rage? Gluten-free was all the rage. There are 100% people with celiac disease that cannot handle gluten. Absolutely. But man, it was like 30% of the population was gluten intolerant overnight. And I think most of those people have gone back to the gluten. If again, there are legitimate, absolutely 100%. But if we take this to the extreme, the not so extreme, we're going to have our bread, our regular wheat bread. Then we're going to have our gluten-free wafers, right? Then we're going to have the non-GMO stuff. And then there's always going to be somebody who will come and say, well, I can't tolerate this side of the oven. And then we end up with, and forgive me if I'm coming across, as uncaring, but we're going to have a whole spread, right? Pick your juice and pick your cracker, and whatever it is that you think is best for you is going to be what we do. We're going to be accommodating to you.
But isn't that the same way that religion has been diluted throughout the ages? Saying that, why they can ordain gay ministers.
So I think that when you say religion has been diluted over the ages, I think that is hitting the nail on the head. And so if we just stop the conversation there, and we start the conversation with, well, what is it that Christ has done for you, right? Do what we have done. Why do we have this sacrament? Why do we need it? How did Jesus institute it, right? How often and for what reason do we take it? At the point that you realize your guilt and your burden of sin, and you want to go to the altar, a sip of wine is going to be probably the least of your worries, right? And if it is, then that's something that we talk about in pastoral care, in the sense of, hey, if you're someone who struggles, talk about it with your pastor. Talk about it with the people who care about you and your eternal soul and want you to receive God's gifts. That's what we're here for, is to have these discussions and have this standard that we don't need to compromise on. Okay? Now that I've said that, let me offer an alternative for discussion. Okay? If in fact the wine was watered down like we know it was, right? What is there to say? What is there stopping us from having very little watered down wine and more watered down wine? Right? What do you think? What do you think, Pat? You're smirking at me.
I don't know, I was just thinking the difference between grape juice that's starting to ferment and wine that's already fermented. So, you got your levels right there. It begins to ferment.
Yeah.
This may.
Yeah. Well, and I used to have a PBT, right? A portable breath tester. If you eat, that really soft white bread that's total bad for you, that you get for like $1.
Really good.
Huh?
Wonder Bread.
Wonder bread, yes.
You couldn't put peanut butter on it.
No, it's delicious. I mean, there's no nutrition in it at all. But if you eat a piece of Wonder Bread and then you blow in a PBT, did you know you'll blow either a 0.01 or a 0.02?
Oh, no, really?
Yeah. That is widely accepted and non-disputed. Because, well, what makes the Wonder Breads puffy and soft?
The yeast.
And what makes grape juice wine?
Yeast.
Or beer.
Or beer. Yeah. So what we have is alcohol is a fact of life, right? And then you have this sort of pietistic, well, I'm not going to ever touch alcohol so that I don't have a problem. And therefore anything that says alcohol, I'm more Christian than that, right? Nutrition, hey, far be it for me to force you to eat gluten if you have celiac disease. That would be horrible, right? That we can talk about. I'm more Christian than you, so I'm not going to drink wine. I'm going to drink green grape juice. See how this is a problem?
They do have a de-alcohol wine.
And they do have a de-alcoholed wine. You are correct. Going back to my example of the white bread, what I think is we have wine, strong wine, is because it's the best for germs. And if we have a common cup, stack the odds in your favor. And it doesn't spoil as fast because of the higher alcohol content. We mix it with water, right?
At my whole church, I made that observation because I volunteered again. Maybe. That's the way we used to do it. We didn't have grape juice. We always put in the cup water and then 1 drop of wine.
Yeah. So if you have 98% water and a couple of drops of wine, is there wine in there?
Yes,
Is there alcohol in there?
yes,
Is it the same thing that's in the rest of the cups?
no. It is.
Okay, so we have most people saying yes and one no.
Chemically, it's the same, but Not as.
Not as strong.
Strong.
Okay,
Yeah, I can see.
It's
Yeah.
still the blood of.
Yeah, you don't know what it
Christ.
was in 32 AD either, exactly.
Yeah.
You know, they
Yeah,
were
yeah.
We know it
testing
wasn't
it before
exactly the same.
they
Well,
had
true.
the supper, the Last Supper, they didn't go around and test the wine, see the alcohol content was
Yeah.
that night.
and you know, if they were mixing it in the glass, then they may have had different strengths all night, all around the table, right?
Oh, absolutely.
So we're not concerned with the alcohol percentage. What we are concerned with is we're coming together as one, right? And if we can remove an obstacle that both brings in doubt and brings in temptation to be more pious and be a better Christian than others, I think that's a good thing. And if we can let doctrine drive our practice, I think that's the way it goes. What do you think, though? Tell me if you disagree.
What
Mary.
did you just say? Because I wasn't following everything. What did you just say?
So what I was saying is that if we let doctrine be the driver of practice,
Right.
so if we start with the institution and then move forward with that as we need to, if we stick with wine and water as opposed to wine and a unmixed grape juice,
Mhm.
we can remove doubt because it's all one and it is the same. And we can remove temptation for pietism in that we don't create two classes of communers. We don't have the greater Christians who drink juice and the lesser Christians who drink wine, or flip that if you feel so inclined. But we come together as one.
The only thought that I have is using the word pious, because I don't know that the people who commune with grape juice feel piety.
Mhm.
And I don't know that we can judge them with that adjective.
Okay, so if you, I don't know if you can hear, so let me,
Learned that in seminary.
yes.
right?
Piety, good.
Piety, good.
Pietism, bad. So what I am attempting to do, perhaps unsuccessfully, is to put the best construction on those who are choosing juice, which is that it's a better alternative that's available for one reason or another.
Right.
What I am not trying to do is single anyone out and say, you know, look at how bad they're making these decisions. Rather, I think that if we stick with, if they had come to an all wine church, then we have the discussion of, hey, do you have any grape juice? Well, here's why we are all wine. And then it's like, oh, okay. As opposed to those who would come and just, you know, giving the example of someone who would come and say, well, I don't drink alcohol. So if that's all you have for communion, I'll pass.
And the education is what is needed.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think too, that whenever individuals started juice, which was well before my time, every church I've ever been to has had the option that I can think of. I think they did it with the greatest of
You're a lot
intentions.
younger than us.
Yeah.
We only had a community, we only had a one cup and everybody drank in the
Yeah.
cup.
Yeah.
And there wasn't many other choices.
Mhm.
There was wine in the cup. And we're not legally aged either.
And I think that the education and just the ability to take a couple steps back, because it feels like a ratcheting system, right? It feels like once you go to juice, you can never go back. But part of the joy of a new guy in the pulpit is to be able to say, you know, hey, let's reevaluate some things. Let's have a discussion and let's talk about it. Here's another example. Go ahead.
Well, I have a son-in-law
Mhm.
who about 18 years ago, I guess, was sinking into alcoholism,
Mhm.
and he knew
Mhm.
it. And he and my daughter decided just one day that no more, this is it. And neither one of them have ever had alcohol since.
Oh, wow.
And when he comes to our church and has communion, he always takes the juice.
Mhm.
Because he's afraid. He is really physically afraid of what that may do to him because of his past.
Mhm.
What, you know, in his situation,
Sure.
what does he do?
Yeah.
He's thinking for himself about how is it going to affect me personally, knowing what my background is.
Mhm.
We haven't always had the juice alternative either. And I remember when it actually started, we got a new member that did have an alcohol problem. And that's when it first started. Now it blossomed. It was only like a couple of glasses of juice at the time. But now we've got a whole almost half a can.
Mhm. So how
But
much?
you look at the other side too, bread, obviously, you didn't have wafers at the Last Supper either.
Mhm.
You had unleavened bread,
Sure.
and so at some point, it became wafers. So
Mhm.
you really the wafer the bread,
Chunks of bread.
whereas yeah, because I remember you actually had chunks of bread broken off. You had a communion, 1 cup, and you had actual bread. And so we've evolved it or whatever, changed it quite a bit if you look at it, because you truly learned you could take grape juice and a wafer and you neither have bread nor wine.
Mm.
So are you really getting communion?
So I think that you, as much as we're kind of joking about it, I think that's a fair point.
Yeah, I wasn't
And-
making light of it.
Yeah. No, well, I mean,
Yes.
you make a fair point. How much can we mess with it before we've gotten so far away from it where it's like, wait, is this even what we're supposed to be doing anymore? The reason, okay, so 2 things. A pastor I greatly respect at Advent Lutheran, help me out with his name because you guys will type it before I can remember it. McKay, thank you. His wife actually bakes the bread the night before, and she cuts it up into little like brownie size little munchkin pieces. I think that's wonderful. That would be my preference. I think that the idea, the reason it came is because it is the same ingredients as the unleavened bread, and it was pressed into a form that it could not have waste.
Right.
Because if you believe it's the body of Christ, and then there's crumbs everywhere. But I 100% agree with you.
Between the
And
19th and 16th century.
yeah, and so
depending on which you really-
Mhm. And so if my wife ever will agree to bake bread Sunday nights, Saturday nights, then we may go to that. I would love that because I think that it's better, 100%. To address the wine, and don't tell me which of your sons-in-laws it is, because that's not the point of it. But how much better to have this man who was struggling with his faith and with his practice to be able to have that discussion with a pastor who cares about him, right? And to be able to say, yes, you'll get alcohol out of a white bread sandwich. This is true also. More probably than you're going to get in this wine mixed with water. But what we can say 100% beyond a doubt is that this is Jesus being delivered for you. And look at the promises that he has for you. And we take so seriously his sin, just like we take seriously my sin. And what we can cling to are these promises. And so what we don't want to bring in any doubt anywhere, because how could Jesus be for our harm? And I think that's where the relationship aspect is so beneficial. And that's what I'm so thankful that all of you call me. And I had 2 families that couldn't come tonight, and they both texted me. They were like, hey, we're not going to be there. That means a lot to me because, that's what this is. This is supposed to be a relationship. It's a body of Christ. It's a family of Christ. And we're all better off when we can have the hard talks with the people who care about us. We mentioned when you brought in, not you, but when the church brought in grape juice. What color is the wine and what color is the grape juice here?
The wine is white grape and the grape juice is Welch's.
And what is it at Paul?
Wine is normal wine color, dark, like a
Red.
red.
Mhm.
Right.
The grape juice is white.
Mhm.
It's like Welch's.
Yeah.
Well, just either way.
There you go.
So do you all know why that is?
Yeah.
So they had red and white wine back then. So we can't. When you go to Fort Wayne and they buy their stuff from the Holy Land, it's kind of like, looks like mead, honestly. It's a weird color. But they had both. They had both. The reason why Lutherans switched to white wine is because they were drawing the distinction that it is not Christ's body, or it is not his blood in the sense that the Romanists said it, which was it ceases to be wine and becomes blood. But it is Christ's blood in, with, and under, right? In the sense that he says it is, therefore it is.
You sure it wasn't just because they were in Germany and Martin Luther was in Germany and almost all the German wines are white?
The switching came after that. But you make a fair point in that I would wager that a lot of people were using white anyway, and then may have retroactively, well, here's an even better picture. And I think too that a lot of people stick with a certain tradition or practice and don't really know why it was there. And maybe you did know about the white wine. That's
No, because we were using red, and I don't know why it switched or when it switched exactly.
Mhm.
I thought maybe it was because the red, if it's spilled or something. They messed it, you know.
okay. And there, okay, that's true.
Catholics.
But that's true, right? Is that not something that where practice, maybe it doesn't drive doctrine, but realistically spills happen and these paraments are crazy expensive. So white wine's gonna come out better than red.
Or just the price of the wine, somebody gave you a better deal on the white, and so that's why you got a case of that one instead of the red.
I think that something that we struggle with is trying to find the right wine, because you all have an idea of what communion wine should taste like.
Mhm.
And you if you're a wine drinker, you know what your favorite table wine is. And at some point you thought to yourself, this wine would go well with this food. And then you're like, no, focus. Right? And so we want to pick something that is correct, but we don't, and we are free to change it, but we don't want it to become a distraction to where it's like, oh, this wine doesn't taste as good as the last stuff. I like that last stuff better. Or, wait till I bring in the communion wine next month, then you get the good stuff, right? And right, that would be an easy thing to fall into. So I think it's sort of, you pick one, Manischewitz, white, you stick with it, and we move on. It doesn't stain the tablecloth. Yeah. Okay, well, it is 7:13, which means we are just about at time. What I hoped to communicate, and I'll just reiterate it, is that the licensure for communion for me is within the right of the church, and it is operating within both divine right and the human right. And I also hope we had a good discussion about communion doctrine driving our practice. Now, just because I'm telling you all tonight that I would like us to switch from grape juice to wine and water does not mean that decision has been made. So I can tell Diane that you and me decided when she wasn't here, but I don't think that would go well for me.
I said for me to call her.
I'm sure she did. So we have weeks. Please, let's talk about it. Let's have a good discussion. That's part of the joy of this. And you care enough to be here and to have these talks. And let's decide together how we can most accurately express our Christian faith. And if you disagree with me, we'll have a great talk regardless. And again, nothing's decided, and we'll go from there. I'm just tickled to be here. Happy to be here. Happy that you all
I
participate.
will admit that he's Baptist.
Yeah. So there's, I'm not even going to touch that. We'll just leave that for another night. So you all have my number. Call me. Let's end with Lord's Prayer. All right. Lord, remember us in your kingdom and teach us to pray. Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we forgive those who trespass against us.
And lead us not
Into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory, forever and ever.
Amen.
Incidentally, are we going to get into that addition to the Lord's Prayer?